Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share Dogman Encounter horror stories. First story, Mothman in the Nicholas County Mountains. Some years ago, I would go up to my grandparents for a couple weeks every summer to spend time with them and go to vacation Bible school. They live in the mountains of WV, and you can basically describe that place BFE incarnate, and own neighbors for at least every half mile, and it's as peaceful as all get out. I was quite the scary story and horror buff ever since my dad let me watch The Army of Darkness. This led to me being fascinated with everything having to do with monsters and cryptozoology. So when I found out my state had their very own monster, I was all about it. I would look everywhere for signs of something that isn't quite on the cusp of ordinary, possibly to a fault. This would follow me up to my grandparents with me reading my book of urban legends. I was completely ate up with it. The first week went by all well and good. Then one night in the second week, I had something very strange happen to me. To this day, I have no idea what I saw. All I know is it was not normal. While I was there, I would sleep on their couch in the living room, which had the back glass door right behind it. In front of the couch was my grandpa's gun case that had plate glass doors on the front of it that would reflect anything behind the couch and outside the door. Now I want you to imagine waking up in the middle of the night with that field of vision. I had always slept with the TV on to distract me from my mind as I fall asleep. I wake up to the TV off and an engulfing pitch blackness. Half asleep, I look around and my eyes wander to the gun cabinet. In the reflection, I see two large floating crimson ovals side by side. Needless to say, I'm freaked out, but I just can't gather the courage to move and look out the door behind the couch. All right, if I'm doing it, I'm getting the hell to my grandma asleep in the front of the house. In one swift motion, I jump up and stare. For what seemed like an eternity, I stared into those red orbs. Finally, a synapse fired, and I ran to where my grandma was. Panting, freaking out, confused. For some reason, I walked to the window that overlooks the woods across the street. Hesitantly, I peeled back the curtains to look out. Across the street, in the trees, two red orbs. I am unsure of the amount of time that passed with me just staring at those two blood-red, glowing, oblong spheres when all of a sudden they just shot up into the sky. I woke my grandma up to inform her to what had just happened. She didn't think much of it in her sleep-riddled mind, I guess. I was just told to lie down and go back to sleep. There's all sorts of critters out here. Second story, The Mothman Cometh. I love horror stories and horror movies. This is my favorite subreddit, to boot. I wouldn't say total immersion has stopped me from being startled or scared when I see or hear chilling stuff, but I will say that I don't exactly get scared by the boogeyman. Mostly, there was one story that my friends told me when we were young. It was about the Mothman. I don't know what story you heard, but chances are it's a similar urban legend. It goes a little something like this. Somewhere in the world is a being who is almost human, appears almost human, except for one little detail. His eyes bug out of his skull like a moth's, and he craves the light in a similar way. If you leave your blinds up at night, there's a chance that one day you'll look over and there the Mothman will be, hands grasping at the glass, trying to get inside to the beautiful glow of the light inside. That was the story my friends told me. I know that the actual legend has the creature more, for lack of a better word, creature-like, but I think the realism to their story was what got me so badly. From that point until today, I don't even like to leave the blinds open during the day, just in case. Everything changed about a year ago when my husband and I were getting in a tiff over why I didn't like him leaving the windows open at night. Apparently in the 3 years we'd been married and 5 years total we'd been together, I never mentioned my fear of the Mothman. But really, would you? What I realized that night was that I had actually forgotten why I was scared. Over time, you just become used to the status quo, I suppose, and never question why you do things that may be a bit off of the norm. Finally, I broke and explained that, crazy though it may be, I'm scared of this mythical figure. It was a revelation to the both of us, as I hadn't thought of the Mothman in years. To him, it was hilarious because of my aforementioned love of horror and and all things scary. He couldn't believe there was any urban legend out there that got to me to such a degree. From that point on, whenever possible, he started to pick on me about the Mothman. Recently, we moved to California, which generally has been a fun experience, but our new apartment has a problem with one of the curtains, and it won't stay down. So, some nights, I come home, only to walk into my bedroom and discover that the window shade is wide open. I keep asking my husband to fix it, but he thinks it's funny. Thought it was funny. Last night, I came home and walked into the bedroom, and the window shade was up again. I almost didn't even notice. I think I may have even been getting close to nipping that little fear of mine through exposure alone. So, of course, that was the night the Mothman finally came. I glanced up from my paperwork, and there in the window were two bright red eyes staring back at me. I screamed and slammed the door closed. And from there, it gets kind of sketchy in my memory. I know that I went into the kitchen, and I know I hid in the bathroom, no windows, of course. And I called for my husband. And I also know what you all are thinking happened next. I called, and he wasn't home. He was stuck late at work. So who was at the window? And thus our twist occurs. But that's not what happened. My husband was home. My husband was a funny guy. My husband just wanted to play a prank. Maybe I wasn't really getting over my fears after all. And I guess when I was in the kitchen, I grabbed the butcher knife from the rack. But at least now the Mothman's dead. Third story. The creature out my window. I used to hate bringing up old paranormal encounters I had when I was a kid. I was known as the brave, stoic, and rational one. But obviously being a kid, I was the complete opposite. I was a teenager when this happened, 14 to be exact. I was very skeptical and hated these topics. But I'm dragging on, so I'll start talking about what actually happened. I used to have a bunch of paranormal encounters when I was younger, nothing crazy. A shadow here, things moving there, so I wasn't new to this. But one night, one I definitely couldn't shake was when I was getting ready for bed. I used to sleep on a bunk bed with my brother being on the bottom bunk. I never complained because I would love to look out the window that practically encased my whole bunk. We had curtains, but I would put them in a way that the frame would hold the curtains open just enough that my eyes could see outside. It was around 10 p.m., and I was getting tired, but for some reason I didn't feel comfortable sleeping. As I was staring outside, I could feel my eyelids get heavier and heavier, closing only a little. I realized I was falling asleep, so I decided to get comfortable at least, and in doing so I woke myself up more. This seems like a way to extend and drag this on. But I want to emphasize that yes, I was tired, but I wasn't asleep. I laid back down, again waiting until I got sleepy again when I saw out the window a shadow. At first I didn't think much of it, trying to rationalize it as my peripheral vision or the curtain swaying. But curiosity struck, so I then stared out the window where I saw this shadow pass. Nothing. To describe my front yard, as if I'm standing towards the window, from the window, all you can see was a little pathway that led to the side of my house. It was a trail on the perimeter to go around back. There was a gate, so the dogs we had in the back wouldn't go to the front. The path from the way I was facing went left to right. The little trail was out of view, as it was on the wall to my right. On the far left of the window, you can see a little bird bath with a giant tree to the left of it, out of view. And to the right of the bird bath was a Christmas decoration, recently put up. I'm sorry if it's hard to understand the layout. But back to the encounter. I stared at the bird bath, where the shadow seemed to disappear from. And from out of view came this tall, black figure. Black isn't the actual color, not like it was dark or shaded black. It looked as if it was the darker than every color in the world. I stared at it. It seemed that everything around it blended into it, kind of like it was translucent. It's contradicting my comment about its color, I know, but this thing didn't seem to abide by our laws in the first place. Darker than any color, yet able to be seen through. So tall if it stretched its arms up high, it could easily climb over my one-story house. What scared me wasn't that it was there, it was that the moment I saw it, I could have sworn every single noise I heard vanished. The noise the ceiling fan makes when its blades are spinning so fast it shakes the fan. Or the AC as it blew cool air, there weren't a single noise I could hear, except that whistle of silence that pierces your ears. I stared at it for what felt like 3 minutes, maybe shorter, when it stared at me. Like a jump scare, didn't slowly cock his head or scan in my direction. It was as if he knew exactly where I was at the moment he turned, and his head snapped towards me. It stared at me with these surprisingly dull yellow eyes and smiled. Its teeth shined compared to its color. They appeared almost heavenly white. I used to always tell people about this, and every time I leave this next part out, only because it sounds so unbelievably fake that I feel the moment I say it, people will think I'm lying. But after it smiled, I saw him turn away, and from his back grew these matching wings. Not like the movies where feathered wings appear when they remove their shirt or something. This thing used its own flesh and morphed his own back to make these wings. No feathers, just straight flesh. How he was able to actually use them, I don't know. But I'm not going to argue with the laws of science when I'm seeing something paranormal. But under the moonlight, I saw it jump and fly away. As it went further from my view, it appeared as a bird. I was too scared to move, too shocked to say anything. But the moment it left my ears, it suddenly started working. The fan, the AC, my brother snoring. I don't know how, but even after all that, I fell asleep. I then told everyone at my house. Obviously, they laughed it off and said you probably had a dream or didn't realize you were dreaming already. At school, I had a habit of making stories up because at the time people would talk about scary things that happened to them, and I'd make it up to fit in. But now no one believed me. I never felt like anyone actually believed me. And to be honest, I don't expect some of y'all to as well. But this did happen, whether y'all do or don't. Also, this is kind of a PS for anyone who actually read all this. Sorry for the length. But this is my first post to my entire account, so please go easy on me. I'm pretty nervous about joining in communities and being an acting member. I write as a hobby and really enjoy it. Honestly, I believe that because I have a passion in writing that people assume this story is fake. That's also a possibility, but anyways, thank you for listening to me. Fourth story. I finally learned why I got away with murder. I had not planned on going to Miles' house to murder him, but to be fair, I had not gone there not planning on murdering him either. I'm not sure what I thought I was doing when I crossed over our connected front yards and pressed his doorbell. It was pretty late at the time. It had to be past 10, but still true to form, he invited me in with a sincere smile on his face. Usually in a situation like this, you'd expect a long silence or for the person who owned the house expecting you to get to the point. But not Miles Burgess. The minute I passed the threshold, it was blah blah this and blah blah that. Every other sentence punctuated with a hearty laugh and a good-natured slap on the back. The thought of hurrying me along had not even crossed his mind. Instead, he motioned me to the kitchen and offered me a piece of steak he had grilled earlier, but had been unable to eat. Without waiting for a reply, he took the slab of meat from its spot on the counter and placed it in the oven. I sat down at his table while he grabbed plates, silverware, napkins, and a cold beer out of the fridge. The whole time he talked about how interesting it was we were both night owls and started making plans for future midnight talks on his back porch. Finally, he pulled the T-bone steak back out of the oven, carefully placed the now warm meal in front of me, and grabbed the seat beside me. "You really did me a favor, buddy," he informed me with the same levels of honesty and warmth his words always carried. Now I don't have to go through the trouble of putting it in a Ziploc and finding a place for it in the fridge. I stared at him blankly. The amount of work he just did to get the steak ready for me was far more than it would have taken to put the thing in the fridge. But listening to him, I could tell he honestly found putting all of it together for someone easier than saving it to feed himself later. As usual, I was aware of how decent of a person the guy sitting a few feet away from me was. At his core, Miles was a good man. "So, what can I do for you this evening?" For a silent moment, Miles sat beside me with his trademark room-brightening smile. But as that moment fell away and the silence was broken as I tightened my grip around the handle of the steak knife he had laid out for me. With a quick, fluid motion, I jabbed the serrated blade in the direction of Miles' throat. I applied a significant amount of force and braced my arm for an amount of resistance on impact that was unrealistic. When I was done, the blade was deep enough inside his flesh the base of the grip was touching his skin. I came to do that. I answered his question with a bit of uncertainty in my voice. I guess. It was silent again, while I continued to clutch the handle of the knife. I was now standing out of my seat, looking down at Miles, and could tell I had missed his windpipe, which I had been trying to hit. Instead, I had plunged the knife into the area just to the right of his throat. Miles just looked at me. His warm smile was gone. Instead, his eyes looked at me with confusion. In that 5 or so seconds with the knife still in his neck, he didn't fight me. He didn't even stand up or try to get a hold of the plastic grip of the knife. His mind still had not fully processing what had happened to him. But slowly the understanding pushed through the denial, and he began to open his mouth. I'm not sure if he was about to scream or say something. Knowing Miles, he was probably going to ask if he had accidentally done something to upset me. I was not interested in talking to him anymore, though, so I quickly pulled the steak knife out of his throat. Instead of the sounds he had meant to make, the noise that escaped him was a wet coughing sound from both his mouth and the hole in his neck. Blood poured out of both of them as well. Now aware of his state, Miles fell backwards in his chair, clutching at his throat with both of his hands. He was probably hoping to stop the loss of blood, but there was too much of it to do so with his own strength. A guttural, choking noise started to work its way out of him while he rolled around on the ground. I walked over to Miles as the color in his face drained away and the pool of blood around him grew wider. It had all happened so fast. I was aware that I must have hit the jugular while I watched Miles writhing around begin to slow. His eyes glazed and Miles stopped moving altogether. I mumbled to myself while I looked over the now lifeless corpse of my next-door neighbor. Not at all like I had expected. I shrugged. Looking down at the knife in my hand, still dripping with Miles' blood, I felt waves of consciousness washing over me. From the second I had walked into his house, it had all felt like a dream. Looking down at Miles, it was obvious everything that had just happened was reality. Oh well, I said quietly to myself with a second shrug. I got down on my knees in the warm pool of blood around Miles. With both hands, I held the knife over his chest. I took a breath and plunged it with enough force to break through his ribcage. A crushing and gushing noise filled the kitchen. The resistance in his chest forced me to use a bit of strength to pull it back out. I held it over Miles' body again, and again I stabbed it into him. Over and over I stabbed him until sweat started to drip down my forehead and into my eyes. I used my wrist in an attempt to rub the stinging liquid away, but I only succeeded in smearing blood across my face. Understanding it was futile, I decided to work through the discomfort, continuing to stab the hunk of meat more and more. I'm not sure how many times I stabbed him in the end. There wasn't a purpose for doing it, and I hadn't thought to keep count. It just seemed like the thing to do at the time. I only stopped my work when I felt too tired to continue. But for good measure, I mustered the strength to stick the knife deep inside what was left of Miles one more time. I did not pull it back out. With some difficulty, I pushed myself off the ground, feeling the aching in my knees from kneeling for too long. I used some of the napkins from the table he had gotten for me earlier to wipe enough of my sweat and his blood from my face and hands to feel comfortable. I tossed them on the floor around me. Before heading back out the front door of his house, I grabbed the steak off the table where I had been sitting. On the way across the 2 lawns towards my house, I thought of taking a bite of the steak. In the end, I decided to wait until I was inside where I could grab some utensils. Ever since I was little, eating steak fat grossed me out. 2. When I woke up the next morning, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. The mistake had not been killing Miles. As far as I am concerned, my actions were neither a mistake or a success. Instead, my mistake had been the complete lack of effort to cover up my actions. I had been so carefree and tired following the act, I had left a trail of evidence from his kitchen right to my front door. Climbing out of bed, I felt the previous night's repercussion on my own body. I'm not much for exercise, so my chest and shoulders were sore after the workout of repeatedly bringing the knife down on Miles' chest an uncounted amount of times. My legs had also become tight from an extended period of kneeling over the body, and the tenderness in my knees told me they were bruised from carrying my weight on the linoleum floor. The worst pain was in my hands. The skin of both palms was covered in torn skin where the blisters had formed and broken away. My wrists felt fine when they were motionless, but when I tried to use them in any way, the sudden pain would cause me to involuntarily exhale. I assumed this was from a continuous combination of the impact of the knife hitting bone and floor and the strain from prying the knife back out. Slowly, I made my way to my feet and headed towards the dresser on the far side of my bedroom. Along the way, I pulled off the still bloody clothes I had been wearing the night before. I gently tossed them on the bed, figuring I need to burn them in the sheets at some point later in the day. Down to my underwear, I put on a pair of gray sweatpants and a white sweatshirt. My reflection in the mirror showed both bright colors only seemed to draw attention to the dried blood on my hands and face. In that moment, I wished I had showered the night before, but I knew I didn't have time to do it now. Pulling the hood up on the sweatshirt, I headed out of the bedroom and down the stairs. Walking out the front door, it was immediately evident I was probably already too late to achieve anything. A police car was parked in Miles' driveway, and a few more sat on the curb in front of his house. His front door was open, and a single piece of bright yellow tape with back lettering spelling "Crime Scene Do Not Cross" was pulled across. The flimsy barrier did not last long. About the time it caught my attention, a hulking figure in a navy blue uniform pushed past, sending it to the ground. The figure turned on the front stoop of the house and grasped metal railing. He threw his head over top of the barrier. A retch followed by a wet splatter echoed over the yards as he evacuated his breakfast into the flower garden that lined the base of Miles' house. He pulled his head back up over the banister, and I could tell by the wrinkles on his pale face and his mostly gray hair he was an older officer. Standing in my driveway, I thought about how it was too late to do anything about the inside of Miles' house. Anything I left in there would already be in their possession. Thinking it over, I figured the evidence included fingerprints, my bloody footprints, the murder weapon, and about a dozen other things. I didn't remember drinking any of the beer, so they wouldn't get DNA from my saliva. I sighed and scratched the back of my head, forgetting about the dried blood covering them. I placed both of them in the sweatshirt pocket. I guess this is why people don't usually do this. I thought a little disappointed in this outcome. Asterisk, or maybe it's that whole thing about the value of human life. I had never really understood the whole idea of us all being inherently valuable based on being alive. I had read philosophy for required college courses where dead, or almost dead, people argued about why people mattered. All I remembered taking from these classes was how these individual people were desperately trying to make a case for why they were personally inherently important. Maybe I just didn't get it, but philosophy all seemed a bit desperate to me. But the nervous looks on my professor and fellow students' faces when I voiced opinion about the value of human life told me it was not an accepted viewpoint. I didn't change my opinion, but I learned not to bring it up around other people. "Morning," an authoritative voice asked, evacuating all of the thoughts of philosophy in college out of my mind. I turned towards the voice as it moved down my driveway. It was a stocky man wearing the same navy blue uniform as the guy who had just vomited in Miles' flowers a minute ago. This guy was younger, though, and had less of the markings sewn on the uniform as his counterpart. This younger cop also didn't look as sick, but I did make note of him appearing a little pretty pale. "My name is Officer Baker," the cop informed me as he pulled a notepad and pen out of his chest pocket. "Mind if I ask you a few questions about last night?" "Sure." I knew it was a matter of time before he saw the dried blood if he had not already. I could hide my hands in my pocket, but the blood on my forehead and neck would be impossible to hide even with my hood up. Both turning myself in and trying to run for it seemed like foolish, impulsive moves, though. I figured if he had caught me, there was not much I could do about it now anyway. "You are William Conover, correct?" "Yes, sir." "How well did you know your neighbor Miles Burgess?" Officer Baker asked, not hiding the fact Miles was dead. "I knew him pretty well." I answered, not hiding the fact I knew he was dead. "He moved in 6 months ago. We didn't hang out or anything, but I knew him better than any of the other neighbors due to his nature." "His nature?" Officer Baker inquired, writing down everything I was saying onto the note paper. What do you mean by that? Miles was a pretty outgoing guy. I answered, watching the methodical movement of Baker's hands. He was the kind of guy who would ask you how you were doing and turned it into a conversation. He just kind of sucked you in. Sounds like Mr. Burgess was a good guy. Yeah, Miles was a good man. Did you see or hear anything last night coming from Mr. Burgess' residence? Officer Baker said, looking up at me from his pad and paper. Nothing at all. I lied, knowing that just because I accepted my imminent arrest didn't mean I had to admit anything. Anything at all, Mr. Conover? Officer Baker said, removing the pen from paper and dropping his hands to his side. He took a step closer to me and began speaking in a more hushed tone. Even if what you heard or saw is something that seems utterly impossible in real life, you can trust one won't think of you as a liar or a madman. I swear, I'm a friend. No, I lied after a few solid seconds of confused silence. I didn't see or hear anything over there last night, ordinary or otherwise. All right then, Officer Baker said with a mixture of disappointment and skepticism in his voice. He took a step back from me and began writing on the notepad again. Well, Mr. Conover, I will let you know if I hear anything on our end. I keep my door locked for the next few days, just in case. And if your story changes and you remember seeing anything unusual or strange last night, give us a call and ask for me personally. Have a nice day. I returned the sentiment while I watched the officer make his way down my driveway. The gears in my head feverishly spinning, trying to understand what had just happened. Baker had not even treated me like a possible suspect. There had been no way he could not have recognized the blood on my face. The memory of him assuring me he was a friend, in hushed tones playing over and over in my head. I couldn't shake the confusion for the rest of the day while I cleaned up my house from the events of the night before. Around 6 that night, I got back home from the pit deep in the woods where I had finished burning the last of the clothes I wore. But I knew that all of that would only delay the inevitable until they analyzed the DNA I'd left everywhere. I knew from a bit of research I had conducted at a stoplight that it could take anywhere from a few days to a few weeks, but still I prepared myself for further questioning from the police. A week and a half passed, and I had heard nothing. Deep down I knew it was dumb to tempt fate, but it didn't make any sense. It didn't take a modern-day Sherlock Holmes to tell I had clearly killed Miles. But even if I was just exaggerating how obvious it was in my mind, there had surely been enough evidence to warrant a second interview with me. I could feel myself starting to get paranoid, and it was a deviation from my usual state of mind I did not like. So I decided to call Officer Baker to get to the bottom of this regardless of the consequences. In a small town like this, it only took a few seconds to get in touch with the operator at the police station, and when she transferred me, Officer Baker answered on the second ring. Hello, Officer Baker speaking. A gruff voice came from a speaker in my phone. What can I do for you today? Yeah, I replied, second-guessing my decision. This is Will Conover. My neighbor Miles Burgess was murdered last week, and you told me. Don't say anything else. Officer Baker interrupted, his voice now hushed to keep others from hearing him. You don't know who could be listening in. I was just... Shut up, damn you. Officer Baker whispered, yelled through the speaker. If you have any information or just want answers, come to the Old Town Center at midnight tonight. Before I could say anything, else Officer Baker hung up the phone. For a few minutes, I just sort of stared at the screen of my phone. I had no idea what was going on anymore, and I was starting to feel agitated about everything. Again, this was a feeling I'm not accustomed to feeling. The rational part of my mind calmly explained this was surely some kind of trap, and going to this meeting place would just end up with me in handcuffs. The growing, infuriated corner of my mind screamed that it didn't matter if it was a trap or not. I was going to figure out what was going on in this town. Around 11:45 that night, I drove my car up to the town center for whatever was waiting for me inside. It had taken me longer to find it than I had thought. He had said Old Town Center, and I spent a while looking for an abandoned meeting area. But it turned out the building that housed the rented meeting rooms was just called Old Town Center. Pulling into a spot, I stepped out of the car and headed into the building. Walking into the lobby, I figured I would have to make my way around a darkened building to find the meeting center for an ambush. Instead, I found the place bright and still open for meetings. I walked up to the bored-looking teen sitting behind the main desk. I'm looking for Officer Baker, I stated, looking down at the receptionist who kept her eyes on the computer screen in front of her. Meeting room, she said, still not making eye contact with me. She pointed to a hallway on her right. Down that way, and the last room on the left. I thanked her and began walking in the direction she had pointed. Making my way down the fluorescent light hallway, I noticed a big dry erase sign beside the last door on the left. It was difficult to make out at first, but as I got closer, I could read the words hastily written on the board. Enough is enough. Lead speaker, Officer Leroy Baker. Bewildered, I didn't take my eyes off the sign until I turned into the open door of Meeting Room A. The meeting room was clearly the building's largest meeting room. It was full of stadium seating, with 2 sets of stairs making their way down either side of the massive chairs. Almost every chair had a person sitting in it. They were clearly all people from the town because I recognized a lot of them without really knowing who they were I'd first seen them. I was able to make out the face of the huge old cop I had seen vomiting in Miles' Flowers the week before. There were also a few other faces I remembered making their way in and out of the crime scene throughout that morning. Still fairly convinced this was some odd plan to ambush me, I continued into the room anyway. I was eventually able to find a single open seat in almost the direct middle of the chairs. I carefully sighed, stepped in front of people having hushed conversations until I made it to the spot, and took my place. I admitted to myself, if this was an unorthodox arrest, it had worked. I was right in the middle of at least a quarter of the town's adult population. At midnight exactly, the lights in the auditorium dimmed. It was still more than bright enough to see everyone around me in the room, but the change had succeeded in hushing the crowd. From a spot on the right, at the far corner of the meeting room, a familiar stocky figure stepped in front of the crowd. Although he was not wearing the police uniform he had on when we previously talked, I recognized him clearly. "Welcome back, everyone," Officer Baker said to the now completely silent crowd of townsfolk. "I would like to thank you all for taking time out of your night to meet me here. As we all know, the threats surrounding us are both real and multifaceted." Mumbles of approval from the crowd. We could have chosen to crumble or self-destruct when facing the odds against us. But every person in this room has chosen to stand their ground against the terrors we will face. And we made that decision because we strive for a better and safer community. Before we move forward, I would like to know if there is anyone new among US who may not understand the fight you have chosen to partake in. From my spot in the middle of the crowded room, I could tell that Officer Baker was staring right at me. He sat silently as a few hands slowly raised into the air to indicate these were the individuals he was asking about. I realized he was waiting for me to join in, so I raised my hand. Well, Officer Baker started pulling out a small device and pointing it to the big screen in the front of the meeting area. He pressed the button, and the screen lit to life with the same title that had been on the whiteboard at the meeting room's entrance. "I would like to welcome you on behalf of my associates around you, and I would like to congratulate you on deciding that enough is enough." The crowd around me erupted into an explosion of applause. A few people in the back even gave a wolf whistle or two for good measure. More than half the group got to their feet, elongating the thunderous applause to continue for a lot longer than one would expect. I did not join them on my feet or in applause. Instead, I sat wondering what the hell was happening around me. For too long, the people of this town have been hunted. Officer Baker continued after the applause died down and the townsfolk fell back in their seat. Just a little more than a week ago, another poor soul was lost to the scourge that has infested our once safe haven. Officer Baker aimed the little remote device he had used to turn on the screen directly at me. With the push of a button, a red light flashed on. I looked down at my chest to find an identical red dot placed center mass in my chest. I figured this was exactly what they had lured me here to do. It was my own fault for coming. I did not plan to fight what I assumed came next, but still my hands still involuntarily clutched the arms of the chair I was in. But the police officers in the room did not surround me, and the other members of the community didn't begin to tear me to shreds. I wasn't even vaporized by the device he held trained on me, because it was just a laser pointer. This poor soul, Officer Baker, started with a crack in his voice from grief. He had to wake to find his neighbor and friend had been brutally torn apart. I would like to apologize to you, O'Conover, for failing to stop an outcome we knew was possible. We tried, of course. When Mr. Burgess had first purchased the murder house, several members of our association tried to warn him, but he just laughed off the danger, claiming he would be fine. We should have been persistent. I am sorry, William. Many people in the auditorium mimicked Officer Baker's sympathy to me. A few even aimed sad, apologetic glances my direction. The older woman sitting beside me clasped my left hand with her cold, wrinkled fingers and gave me a quick squeeze while she looked at me with tears in her eyes. We should have done more. A tearful woman's voice shot from behind me somewhere. There was no need for another damn life to be taken in that death trap. A man's rage-filled yell came from the front right to theater. Murder house. The words continued to turn over and over in my brain, but I was unable to wrap my head around what was happening. I sat quietly through the cries of anger and regret for miles until it died down around the room. Officer Baker stood patiently until his fellow townsfolk had gotten it out of their system. I know, friends, he called into the crowd, silencing the last of the voices. A man in the prime of his life cut down by such an awful monster. It is now our job to ensure nothing like this ever happens again in that accursed house. We need to take the fight to them. Wait, I called out over the crowd. Logically, I knew I should keep my mouth shut, but the strangeness of the situation forced the words out of me. Do you know what happened to Miles? Come now, William. Officer Baker answered with calm pity in his tone. You are among friends here. You no longer have to deny the existence of the vile spirit that infested Mr. Burgess' home. The same vile spirit who tore him to shreds in the middle of the night. Officer Baker moved back to addressing the crowd, but I was unable to follow what he was saying. He had just claimed in front of a group of adults that Miles had been killed by a spirit, and not one person decided to question him. In fact, I had seen several people nearby nod in agreement. I had walked into Miles' home and brutally stabbed him over and over again, leaving a trail of evidence a child could have followed to me. And these people believed he was killed by a ghost. That doesn't make any sense. I interrupted again. Every time I opened my mouth, it called attention to the reality I was the killer. But the sheer ridiculousness drove me. You think that Miles was killed by a ghost? Of course. Officer Baker replied with a matter-of-fact inflection in his voice. What else could have possibly gotten to him in the dead of night and murdered him in such a grotesque fashion? A person, I answered. All around me, people's heads turned my direction. Instead of sympathy this time, their faces looked mortified and confused at what I had said. A few people even exchanged nervous glances with one another. The old woman who had squeezed my hand sat as far away from me as she could in her seat with her mouth agape. So, what you are telling me is, Officer Baker started clearly growing annoyed with me. A member of this community made their way into Miles Burgess' home in the dead of night and committed such a heinous act. It makes far more sense than a ghost. I answered firmly, no longer caring at all what it might mean for me. The craziness of all of this needed to be addressed. These people were so afraid to admit one of their neighbors was a killer, they had fled into a world of fantasy. Son, Officer Baker retorted as if he was addressing a petulant schoolchild. I will have you know that Mr. Burgess is not the first person to have died in that house unexpectedly. Yeah, an older man's voice from my left yelled out in agreement. In 1955, Missy Hayworth was stabbed to death in her sleep. Her husband said the knife just floated into the room and slit the poor woman's throat. Exactly, another voice, this time a woman's, joined in from the other side of the room. And after her grief-stricken husband moved away with his secretary, he sold the house to Arthur Mott. 25 years later, Arthur was found hanging from the second-floor landing. They say the haunting got so bad, he rarely had the strength to get out of bed near the end. What happened next? A third woman's voice yelled out the rhetorical question from somewhere behind me. Roberta Armistead bought the house a few months later. 37 years later, she drops dead. That woman ran every day and ate right, but her heart suddenly gives out, like she was scared to death. The crowd words grew into incoherent uproar. While Officer Baker struggles to get everyone quiet, I thought over the information they gave me. A woman is killed by her cheating spouse. Another man succumbs to depression. And finally, Roberta Armistead. For Christ's sakes had been my neighbor when I moved in. Sure, she had run and eaten right, but only after her third heart attack. All of these people died from explainable situations, and this room full of fools thought they were being killed by vengeful spirits. Now William, look at the evidence. Officer Baker said, still addressing me as an annoyed teacher. The rest of the theater had finally gotten back in line. What else could have happened in that house that night? Only a fool would think. I began with the heat of anger behind my face, but I paused for a moment, looking at the face of Officer Baker and remembering my situation. Cooled down a bit, I started again in a much calmer tone. Only a fool would think that anything besides a horrible abomination from hell could have committed such a heinous act. That terrible demon killed my good friend Miles in his own home. He deserved better. He was a good man. Leaning back into my seat, I felt the tension in the room give way while members of the crowd nodded in affirmation. Officer Baker took back control of the meeting and continued from where he had left off before my interruption. I guess these people didn't want to confront the reality of what humans are capable of doing to one another. Luckily for them, I had gotten it out of my system with Miles. But as the meeting went on, I did think about how the house would probably be up for sale again in a little while. If anything happened to the new resident, they would probably just assume it was the curse of the murder house again. Hell, even if they condemned the thing, people would probably dare each other to go in and spend the night around Halloween. That dumb shit teenagers in small towns do to avoid the monotony of living in the middle of nowhere. The thought did give me a bit of thrill. Honestly, though, I was not planning on using that house to murder anyone else. But to be fair, I was not planning on not using the house to murder anyone either. That meeting ended a few hours ago, but I already have most of the possessions I really need packed into my SUV. Anything else still in the house when I leave tomorrow afternoon will be given to Goodwill or thrown in the trash. Either way works for me. When all the ideas about the future of Miles' house had finished dancing through my head, I started paying attention to the meeting again. I had missed a lot, and they were starting a remembrance of all the townsfolk they had lost over the last 12 months. Of course, they said each and every one of them was due to some ridiculous fantasy being. It had started pretty entertaining seeing all of the rationalizations, or non-rationalizations, they used to explain death by natural causes or accident. Some woman had died after getting drunk in her above-ground pool and drowning. They claimed she had been lured into the pool by the beautiful song of mermaids and viciously pulled onto the water. When anyone died of cancer, it was blamed on an elusive pack of vampires just outside of town. The teen who died in a drunk driving accident a month ago was said to have been attacked by the Mothman. It got less amusing when they moved on to the non-accidental deaths. A woman who had clearly had her throat slit was said to have been mauled by a Yeti. A young girl who disappeared last December was whisked away by a Wendigo. A pretty obvious gunshot victim had been a werewolf Officer Baker himself had bravely gunned down in the dead of night. More and more murder victims were brought up and immediately explained away with fantasy bullshit. The loss of life was not what made me decide to pack up and leave. I felt as much for the dead as I did for Miles after I had stuck a knife in his throat. And he had been someone I had known and interacted with regularly. Most, but not all, of the people brought up in the remembrance were drifters who were just passing through town. What told me it was time to get out of Dodge was the slow realization that I was not the only killer in that room. With every passing story, the chance raised that one of the people sitting around me had murdered someone as well. Each fantasy monster was just a representation of someone in the auditorium who had brutally murdered someone. It was clear there were two kinds of people sitting around me. It was clear the people around me fit into two different categories: murderers and people unwilling to admit their friends and family were capable of murder. It was a strange realization that I am unwilling to live in a town of people like me or the type of people who would protect me. Fifth story. I think it was Bigfoot. 2 weeks ago, I considered myself a reasonably skeptic man. I was convinced that somewhere in the vastness of this realm, another intelligent life form inhabited an Earth-like planet. Whether or not said beings have visited us was up for debate. Even though I had never personally experienced anything that could be considered paranormal, I had heard enough stories to leave open the possibility. On the contrary, the notion of the Loch Ness Monster, Bigfoot, Yeti, Mothman, and crypto things alike was laughable. As I lay in this hospital bed, crippled, in pain, and in fear, my view on monsters has drastically changed. I work night shift security for a company that had been experiencing significant vandalism. Graffiti, broken windows, litter, the types of things bored kids find fun to do. The building is located on the outskirts of a small suburban area. The backside, shop area, of the property faces a set of train tracks, a little-traveled highway, and a vast forest beyond the road. The front was offices where I spent most of my time. My duties basically involved watching TV and playing video games while keeping an ear out for any mischief outside. Once every hour, I would take a stroll around the perimeter of the building. The first few months were the most eventful. It was rare that a night would pass, and I didn't have to chase some kids off. A few times these encounters got a bit dicey. I'm not a gun person, so this led to me bringing my German Shepherd pup, Shu, to work with me. He is named after Michael Schumacher. Once the hoodlums realized that my dog didn't like strangers, they stopped coming around. The job became a breeze for a while, and then some strange things started happening. It all started 3 Thursdays ago. It was raining that particular night. I don't make the rounds as much when it rains as I figure nobody really cares to be out in that crap. I was working a typical 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift, and the 2 previous perimeter checks were uneventful. I donned my rain gear and headed out for a 4 a.m. check. As soon as I stepped outside, I was greeted by a horrific odor. A combination of feces, wet dog, and a dumpster on a 100-degree day raped my nostrils. I don't know if it was the smell or what, but Shu was hesitant to leave my side. Unusual behavior for him. As we made our way around the building, the smell still piercing our noses, my flashlight picked up the reflection of something in the grass. It was a blood trail. Shu led the way along the path. Ultimately, we discovered a deer carcass. It was absolutely torn to shreds, blood and guts everywhere. Both of its hind legs were missing. Once morning came around, and the evidence was brought to the building's owner attention, we both agreed it was most likely some type of a prank. We buried the remains in a hole in a far corner of the property. The next night was clear but crisp. My rounds occurred more frequently. Everything was normal until around 2 a.m. It was somewhere around 1/4 to 2:30 when Shu started freaking out. He was barking incessantly, and I couldn't calm him down. I walked into the shop area and immediately heard what sounded like heavy footsteps coming from the roof of the building. A brief check around the building revealed no ladders or any other means of accessing the roof. That smell from the day before was lingering, although nowhere near as pungent. Besides my personal account, no other evidence was able to be reported to the owners. Saturday night was uneventful. Sunday evening would change my life forever. After a fairly anxious but boring 3 hours, I hear a window break. Shu is scratching at the door before I can even get to it. It sounded like a back of the building occurrence, so we quickly made our way there. Everything appeared normal. No kids, no pranksters, nothing. Then Shu took off in a dead sprint. He ran straight towards a small grove of trees separating the property from the train tracks. As I yelled for him to come back, he froze in his tracks about 10 feet from a cluster of 4 or 5 trees. A large, muscular arm reached out and encased his head in its palm. A quick jerk of the wrist, and Shu's neck snapped like a twig. Horrified by the sight, I let out an audible gasp. Whatever this beast was, it immediately focused its attention in my direction. There are 3 entrance points to this building. The nearest 2 are locked. The only unlocked entrance point would require me to run between this monster and the door. Since it was dark, I figured I could make it. I started sprinting. I made it about 25 to 35 yards before I felt a tug on the back of my shirt. The strength of the grip rendered me unable to escape. I fell to the ground. My heavy breathing only served to drown out the thunderous beating of my heart. I managed to gather my bearings only to realize I was being mounted by something. I suppose it took my mind a while to comprehend what my eyes were viewing. I was being pinned to the ground by an ape. An ape covered head to toe with matted red to brownish fur. A human face with a primate body had me pinned to the earth. This creature's eyes glowed a vibrant red. We locked eyes, and it was at this point I came to the conclusion this beast was about to take my life. I vaguely remember trying to kick and punch my way out of this thing's control. My attempted recourse proved futile. My last memory is a bit clouded, but I can clearly recall looking this thing eye to eye and feeling a certainty of death. The giant beast picked me up and hurled my defenseless body against a tree. 20 to 28 feet up, the tree snapped in half. My helpless body served as an unsuccessful saw. I assume a Sasquatch is what broke my back and has left me confined to this hospital bed. My vertebrae lost its battle against said lumber. Bigfoot is real. Bigfoot kicked my ass. I'll never forget that smell. I'll never forget my eye contact with a creature spawned straight from the depths of hell. I miss Shu, and I miss my innocence. Sixth story. The Creeper Club. Someone's breaking the rules. The fact is most houses are incredibly easy to get into. Some of you forget to lock the deadbolt, or don't even lock your door at all. Honestly, pets are our biggest obstacles, and even those we can keep quiet with the proper dosage or cover sense. You see, we research you first. We learn you, your habits, your job, your secrets. You people put most of your business on Facebook anyways. The subtle things you don't even think about, all the way to basically saying, look at this. Today's post, in a relationship, thanks. Now we'll know you're either leaving more or someone's coming over. Doesn't matter which. We'll watch you in their house. Anyone can watch you in public. That's nothing. Anyone can point a telescope into your house. The true excitement comes from seeing how close we can get. Inside your house. And don't be that idiot. I wish you would come to my house. We're a huge club. Someone's been in your house already. It's almost guaranteed. The excitement comes from covering our scent so the dog doesn't bark. Dosing the kibble so they're less aware, or taking the time to make them comfortable with us so they don't bark. It's watching you watch television completely unaware we're just a few feet behind you. Watching you scroll on your phone. Watching you jerk off. That one's a bit unpleasant. We're not here to expose you. Yeah, we record what we do, but nobody wants to see that. Our goal is the videos we take of ourselves. We're always recording when we creep, and we want to see what we can do right beside you. It's to get so close to you that we can move the remote on your recliner from one arm to the other. It's to pick up your keys and put them somewhere else. It's to point your own gun at your head and leave. All of this we record each other or ourselves doing. We have hundreds of thousands of videos. People living alone, multi-family homes, broken homes. It doesn't matter. You're all part of the game that's played globally. We watch you, and I've probably already been in your house. We have rules, and they're very simple. Don't get caught. Do no harm. Record everything. Leave no trace. We're trained, some independently, and some mentored by other members. It's the most exciting thing you can imagine. You think skydiving gives you a rush? Try being inside someone's house. You know every room. You know every hiding place. Your escape is ready, and all you have to do is take a drink from their cup, or whatever the objective is. We don't just go in without a plan and wing it. We have goals every time. The goals can vary from something as simple as moving keys to something as ridiculous as using your bathroom. That one's not something I do. Some of us have standards. My objective is usually to pet your dog at least once while I'm inside your house. Then I'll take a selfie behind you. I keep it simple. I've been doing this for about 4 years, and let me tell you, it got a hell of a lot harder when the pandemic started keeping everyone inside all day and night. but that's fine. It made us get better. I'm not telling you about us, so you can do something to keep us out. We'll always get in. I'm telling you because someone in the Creeper Club is breaking the rules. Most of us have a partner that lives nearby. Some members choose to creep alone, which is fine, but most of us have a partner. Someone to record for us. I can't be sure, but I think my partner is the one breaking the rules. We don't share personal information with anyone in the club. We use code names for our posts and even just to talk face to face. And we always wear masks. Just the basic white, expressionless masks, which all makes finding the bad apple so hard. She posts under the name Enid, and that alone might be her motive. We only know the rule breaker is female because in one of her videos, she took off her shirt and swapped it with one from her Mark's closet and left her shirt. Rule number 4, leave no trace. My partner is a female, and I've seen her without her shirt. Look, say what you want, but when the adrenaline is coursing through your veins after exiting a house, sometimes you have to let that pent-up excitement go somewhere. But anyways, my partner's body looked a lot like Enid's, only my partner goes by Birdie. She could have 2 profiles. It's entirely possible. You see, we as an organization just want to get inside your house and show each other how close we can get to you. That's how we rank up. We all post the videos to our site and rate them. We rate them on planning, difficulty, objective, and exit. So for her to have 2 profiles, she would be creeping almost every week to maintain such a following. Enid used to just post regular videos. She was good. I'm talking cut off a piece of your hair good. And her objectives started getting more and more dangerous. So she was garnering a substantial following within the club. Then she started breaking the rules. In one of her videos, she swapped shirts and left her own. In another, she revealed a Mark's credit card information, front and back. We don't do that. We aren't here to make your life difficult or rob you. We don't even want you to know we were there. Enid is different. Her videos got worse. Her Mark was in his chair watching Netflix. Watching Grey's Anatomy. I don't care about that shit show, but that's all I think about now when someone talks about it, is I watched Enid murder someone while they watched that show. And she posted it. She wanted us to see it. In another video, she poisoned a guy's drink when he went to the bathroom. He came back and choked to death in his favorite chair. Alone. Except for Enid, who just stood behind him. That another thing is so far she's only targeted men that we know of. She could have countless videos she hasn't posted, but the running theory is she targets men. The Creeper Club is not here to hurt you. We just watch. But she's good, and she's out there hurting people and breaking the rules. She posts regularly, and she's already said if we try and pull down her posts, she'll target us. We're supposed to be anonymous to each other, but if she's this far off the rails, well, maybe she could actually come after us. Birdie knows me. Not the real me, but she knows enough about me that if she wanted, she could find me. The other night we were in a trailer. Those are always something because of how narrow they are. And this couple was on the couch watching TV. It was Birdie's Mark, so I was recording. She wanted to swap the forks and the spoons. I mean, it's so innocent and stupid. That's what we're really about. But when she opened the drawer and saw the knives, I swear she hesitated. I couldn't see her face because of the mask. I've never seen her face, but she had to have been smiling underneath it or something. It just felt so weird looking at her when she saw the knives. Then she just swapped the utensils and quietly closed the drawer. We left through a back window. Perfect score, they never knew. No rules broken. But I'm worried because she hesitated. She definitely did. I thought about asking her about it, but if she is Enid, that'd be a quick way to get myself killed. I mean, maybe I'm just paranoid, but I'm worried that even if it's not her doing it now, maybe she wants to start? I don't know, but what I do know is someone out there is thinking about killing you instead of watching you. Do you have any idea how long it takes to research a mark? How many times we go inside to practice? How many times we just stand there watching you memorizing your quirks and mannerisms, learning when you go to bed, how long it takes you to piss? But now I can't stop thinking that instead of just watching you, someone is considering killing you. After all, ain't it right? That's her whole thing. It makes my skin crawl thinking about it. Honestly, she's probably watching you right now. Through a gap in the window. Through the door peephole. Through your own cameras. through a tiny pinpoint hole in your ceiling so she can sit in the attic and watch you. Oh yeah, something else that connects Birdie to Enid. Neither of them use string to keep their masks on. Honestly, I have no idea how the masks stay on, especially when we were, well, moving around a lot. But Enid, in her videos, no straps or strings. Anyways, we've got another mark tonight. This one's mine, so Birdie will be recording. A family nearby, newborn son. I've been watching them for about 3 weeks. Tonight, I'm going to take a selfie with the kid and draw a tiny line on their blanket right at the feet. To them, they'll think it's just a weird scratch or something neither realize they did. So if you wake up tomorrow and notice that, be glad it was just me and Birdie. 7th story. I went camping 10 years ago, and I haven't been the same since. The camping trip was Mikey's idea. We deserved a little vacation, he had said, an opportunity to escape our cramped, cluttered college house and commune with the great outdoors. He had leaned into the center of our clump one night, the same devious glint in his eyes that he always got whenever he was about to drag us into trouble, and said, "How about a trip up the mountain?" I don't know. Cynthia had replied, a bottle of grenadine in one hand and a bottle of Tito's in the other. I'm not very outdoorsy. None of us are. My boyfriend, Josh, agreed. Oh, come on, Mikey urged, slinging an arm around my shoulder. Catherine thinks it's a great idea. Right, Kath? I looked around the room at my friends, at our messy, half-hearted attempt at a pre-game. Autumn cuddled up against her girlfriend, Sylvia, Josh, and Mikey bookending me on the lumpy couch. I loved every part of that small, shitty house I shared with my friends, the wall full of Polaroid pictures, the TV we never got around to mounting, the cat we adopted off the street curled up on my feet. I was going to miss it all. We would all be graduating from college in just a couple weeks, and then our little gang would be disbanding for the summer. It would be nice to spend some quality time with friends before we all had to grow up and enter the real world. Sure, I agreed. Why not? Let's go. Mikey fist pumped a little too forcefully and sloshed his drink onto my jeans. Autumn giggled and raised her cup. What the hell? I'm in too. So, even though we all preferred the sanctuary of our dilapidated college house to the great outdoors, we had motioned our half-empty solo cups together and agreed to a trip up the mountain. After Friday classes surrendered their hold on us, our group of 5 piled into Mikey's old van and took off into the mess of patchy forest that surrounded campus. The balmy April air and the gentle jostling of country roads quickly put me to sleep as I rested my head on Josh's steady shoulder. It was the kind of sleep that never fully took hold, making me aware that I was going somewhere, but completely unaware of where that somewhere might be. When the jolting dip of a pothole shoved me back into consciousness, we were on the 3rd hour of our journey. The old van shook as we climbed the steep mountain toward the campsite, and the overgrown, gravel road we were following looked as if it hadn't been driven on in years. In the seats in front of me, Autumn and Sylvia were looking out their respective windows, admiring the deep ocean of trees that flew past us as we drove. Eventually, our gravel path disappeared under a suffocating layer of encroaching vines, and Mikey pulled the van to the side of the road. Rise and shine, campers. He called back to us. We're hiking the rest of the way up. After an hour of trudging over rocks, weighed down by our heavy backpacks, we crested the summit. The top of the mountain was idyllic, a flat expanse of untrampled grass that felt like it had been tucked away just for us. The rocky ground plateaued out into a perfect clearing, curtained off by a dense border of tall, tangled trees. It felt like our own secluded paradise high above the rest of the world. I shrugged off my bag and breathed in the clean, forest air. We had made it. We wasted no time setting up camp. By the time the 3 tents were pitched and the fire was built, we were all exhausted, but none of us wanted to be the loser who went to sleep first. So we sat around the campfire for hours telling ghost stories and cracking jokes. Somewhere in the middle of Mikey's 3rd story about Mothman, I turned to Autumn. How did you find this campsite, Autumn? Have you been here before? No, I haven't. I just asked for campsite suggestions on Reddit, and someone suggested this place. She shrugged, her blonde curls bouncing over her flannel-clad shoulders. Because that's not sketchy at all. Josh laughed. Autumn gave Josh a defensive shove, and he snatched her up into a playful headlock, their embrace collapsing into a mess of giggles as Sylvia jabbed at them both with a pointy stick she had claimed off the ground. You've heard the stories about this place, though, haven't you? Sylvia asked us, arching an eyebrow. You know, I grew up around here, and my parents were always telling us stories about the mountain. They didn't want us coming up here. They said there were always stories about hikers getting lost in the forest and never being found. That's it, Mikey asked. The stories I heard were way more interesting. I heard people used to live on this mountain, but they had to evacuate the whole place because of some Chernobyl-type situation. Either that or a huge forest fire wiped them all out. I can't remember. I roll my eyes. Mikey was never one for the specifics. Where did you hear all that nonsense? On one of your weird conspiracy blogs. Josh laughed. I actually don't think Mikey is completely wrong this time. Look, I pointed across the perfectly empty clearing to a lump in the overgrown darkness that I had noticed while we were setting up camp. It was a small pile of bricks, the collapsed remnants of a wall that hadn't stood for a very long time. Whatever building used to be here, it was long gone. Sylvia shook her head. I don't know anything about all that, but there was a small commune that tried to live up here a while ago. I don't remember exactly what happened, but they kind of just fell off the radar. I think the police were looking into it. Josh looked around the silent clearing. Well, I don't know what happened to them, but they're definitely not here anymore. Maybe one day they all just vanished. Autumn leaned in close, wiggling her fingers at us, letting the flames of the fire light up her face dramatically before she erupted into a drowsy fit of giggles. Okay, I chuckled. That's enough conspiracy theory talk for tonight. Let's head to bed. I woke to the crackling sound of sausages cooking over the fire and the pink light of morning piercing its way through the mesh of my tent. I emerged from the tent to see Josh, Autumn, and Sylvia sitting around the fire, laughing and poking each other with the skewered hot dogs they were broiling. My stomach growled hungrily at the sight of breakfast. Hey guys, I greeted. Is Mikey still asleep? He's gonna be mad y'all are eating without him. Josh turned to me, the fresh light of the morning haloing his handsome face. I expected him to make a joke about Mikey oversleeping. I expected him to pull me into a tight embrace and to cook me some breakfast over the campfire. I expected a smile, his eyes crinkling in amusement. Instead, his eyes were completely dead, void of any semblance of recognition. I'll never forget that look he gave me. That was the look that started it all, and all these years later, I can still see his blank eyes when I close my own. He'd quirk his head to one side and asked, "Who's Mikey?" I stopped dead in my tracks, the wet grass scratching at my halted legs. "Mikey," I repeated. "Where is he? Is he still sleeping?" "What are you talking about, Catherine?" Sylvia asked, her sharp brow cutting across her forehead. "Who is Mikey? They were just messing with me. They had to be messing with me." I tried to wipe the dumb expression off my face and take a breath. I felt a little stupid for falling for their little charade. It was so typical of Mikey to want to pull a prank on the friend who slept in the longest. He was always the jester, and I was always the fool who worried and fretted over his stupid antics. The only thing that surprised me was how committed the rest of the gang was to acting out Mikey's dumb idea of a prank. Usually one of them would have cracked by now. I turned and stomped away from my friends. I was tired, and I wasn't in the mood for whatever stupid prank they were trying to pull. I unzipped the door to Mikey's tent and was met by an empty interior. A mess of clothing, books, and snacks littered the floor, but there was no Mikey inside the lumpy sleeping bag. When I turned to rejoin my friends, I expected to see stolen glances and stifled laughter, but I was met with the same, hauntingly blank confusion. "What are you doing?" Autumn asked. I threw my hands up in exasperation. "Well, he's not in his tent, so where is he hiding?" "That's my tent," Josh said. "We agreed to bring 2 tents for the 2 of us because I'm such a slob and you like your personal space." Do you not remember? He was looking at me with such confusion and concern that I had to look away, unable to meet his falsely sincere eyes. This was so stupid. I was always the gullible friend the others loved to mess with, always the butt of one of their stupid jokes. No matter how stupid this prank was, their commitment had me almost doubting my own memory. It was a nauseating sensation I wanted to be rid of as soon as possible. This would all be over faster if I just went along with the joke. Okay, very funny. I laughed, coming to sit next to Josh on one of the logs that surrounded the fire. If he wants to hide in the woods and try to scare me instead of eating breakfast, that's his choice. I turned to give Josh a kiss, but his face was still twisted into a look of total bewilderment. He looked so convincingly dumbfounded by my words that it gave me the creeps. There was no hint of amusement or playfulness behind his eyes, only emptiness. Whatever weird joke was being played on me, he didn't show any sign of being in on it. I averted my gaze toward the flames, breathing in its smoke and letting the awkward silence wash over our circle. Everything was so quiet. Then we heard the screaming. It was faint, but all four of us snapped our heads toward the forest where we could hear the cries echoing through the trees. They sounded like they were coming from a short distance away, just past our clearing, down the other side of the mountain. What the hell is that? Autumn asked, jumping to her feet. It sounds like someone is crying for help. Sylvia added, a little nervously. My first instinct was to call my friends out on their increasingly dumb and elaborate prank, but the cries coming from within the dense forest sounded too high-pitched and pitiful to belong to Mikey. It almost sounded like a wounded animal or a baby was wailing out calls of complete and utter desperation. I could just barely make out the word help, but everything else about the cries rang out with an eerie pitch that seemed entirely inhuman, like some creature trying to mimic the cries of a child. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't Mikey. Okay, guys, this seriously isn't funny anymore. Please just tell me if this is a joke or not. I pleaded. Catherine. Josh gave my shoulder a comforting squeeze. We're just as confused as you are. I promise. I'm going to check it out. Autumn announced, confidently stepping toward the tree lean. It's probably nothing, but I would feel horrible if someone actually needed our help. Sylvia looked almost as nervous as I felt, but she hesitantly let go of her girlfriend's hand and let her continue on toward the woods. I didn't want to let Autumn go, but I selfishly didn't want to be the one to step foot into the woods. The noise stabbed at my ear with an incessant drone that I wanted more than anything to end. I just wanted the noise to stop. I was naive enough to believe Autumn might be able to make that happen. A sharp chill crawled its way up my spine as I watched Autumn's body disappear between the twisted branches of the thick forest. I looked down at the 3 forgotten hot dogs broiling over the fire, and my stomach twisted. I had lost my appetite. Sylvia and Josh wanted to play cards while they waited for Autumn to return, but I wasn't in the mood. I faked a headache and retreated from the group, stepping over the forgotten hot dogs and slipping inside Mikey's tent. The crying from the woods had faded to a dull weeping, but whispers could still be heard cresting over the dense expanse of treetops. I zipped Mikey's tent shut behind me, drowning out the last of the wilting whimpers. I tried to distract myself by flipping through some books that Mikey had brought. Part of me was looking for some belongings of Mikey's to show to the group, something that would remind them of his existence. The other part of me was still in complete denial about what was happening to us. The messy collection contained mostly sci-fi novels, but the largest book was different. It was large and leather-bound, the worn edges of its pages spilling out the sides. I flipped through a few pages and was faced with scratchy scrawl and disturbing depictions of creatures I could have never imagined. I knew Mikey was into some weird stuff. I was fairly certain he believed in Bigfoot, but this was a whole different level of weird. I wanted to believe it was another prank, something he had brought to show off around the campfire to scare us all, but some of the pages had bookmarks and notes in Mikey's handwriting scribbled in the margins. It was pretty clear he was taking what was written in this book seriously. I turned through pages depicting woodland yetis and wendigos of increasing horror until my eyes felt itchy and my brain pulsed with even more paranoia. When I reached the middle of the book, a small stack of papers fell out. They were printed out website pages of research Mikey had done on our campsite. It was all there, information on the missing hikers, the commune, and even some research on settlers who had lived in this area. I skimmed all the printouts, and nothing seemed overtly strange about the stories. It just seemed like a string of bad luck to me. The thing I found the most odd was Mikey's obsessive fascination with this place. I pushed the papers away, curling up on Mikey's sleeping bag and shutting my eyes. I didn't feel panic, just exhausted. What was happening around me was so wrong that my brain had no choice but to reject it entirely. Sleep found its way to me, muffling my awareness for moments of fitful dreaming before I would once again come back to myself and hear the sounds of crickets and birds. In my dreams, I had no choice but to replay the sound we had heard in the forest until even that found its way into my waking moments, mingling discordantly with the chirping crickets. It took me far too many dizzy, half-conscious moments to realize that the sound was no longer merely a remnant of my dreams. It was real. The screaming had returned. Josh and Sylvia were sitting on logs playing a ferocious game of Go Fish when I rejoined them. I had no idea how long I had been asleep for, but the sky had already begun to soften into a dusty orange, and my heart sank when I noticed that autumn was nowhere to be seen. "Do you guys hear that?" I asked. The sound was still faint, but I was certain I could hear it cresting over the mountain once again. The same quiet but desperate calls for help echoing off the abundant sea of trees that surrounded us. The incessant, wailing drone continued to roll over me, sending a new bout of nausea through my body. "Yeah, I hear it too," Sylvia confirmed. "Should one of us go check it out? Someone might be in trouble out there." "Yeah." Josh nodded in agreement. "I can go see what the problem is." "No," I shouted a bit too frantically. "I don't think anyone else should go out there until Autumn comes back." Sylvia looked me dead in the eye and asked, "Who is Autumn?" Chills pricked at every inch of my clammy skin. "Autumn," I yelled. "Your girlfriend. She went into the forest hours ago, and she still isn't back." "What the hell, Catherine?" Sylvia spat at me. "Having to be the third wheel on you and Josh's camping trip is bad enough without you making jokes about me having some imaginary, disappearing girlfriend. Whatever joke you're trying to make seriously isn't funny." I turned to Josh, hoping he might back me up, but his usually supportive gaze conveyed only disappointment, as if I was truly making a joke at Sylvia's expense. "It's not a joke," I insisted, "and you're on a third wheel. The five of us all agreed to come on this trip together." I pulled out my phone and frantically tapped at the screen, attempting to produce some kind of evidence to support my claims. Our group chat or a picture of all five of us together. Anything that could prove to my friends and to myself I wasn't completely losing my grip on reality. It was dead. Of course it was. All our phones were probably dead by now. The gravity of the situation I had been denying all morning finally hit me. We were miles and miles away from civilization. All our phones were dead. There was something out there drawing us into the forest, and anyone who crossed the tree line was being forgotten. Autumn was gone. Mikey was gone, and Mikey had the car keys. The insurmountable circle of trees that surrounded us felt like it was closing in on me, flooding our once idealistic campsite with a wave of dense, sticky dread that crept up my spine and tightly wound around my throat. I couldn't breathe. "Whatever." Sylvia rolled her eyes. "I'll let you guys spend some quality time together. I'm going to go on a long walk." Alone. I wanted to reach out and stop her, but my feet felt like they were rooted to the ground. The sound from the forest had faded once again, but the fear they had awoken in me still pulsed through my arteries. As I watched Sylvia's back sink into the tree line, I prayed once again that this was all just some horrible prank. Josh and I passed the remaining hours until sunset in silence. We sat side by side on a log, watching the tree line that Sylvia's body had sunk into. I could tell for Josh's pursed lips and furrowed brow that he was upset and confused by my crazed outburst, and he was worried about Sylvia. He wouldn't look at me. He would only look straight forward at the forest. I couldn't think of a single thing to say. My body was paralyzed and my brain was foggy. This all still felt to me like some odd dream, nothing that could exist in our realm of reality. I felt a tug toward the now too silent forest. My friends were in there, and I was the only person left to save them. Could I really just sit here and let them disappear? Could I walk away from Josh and leave him to come in after me? We sat there in silence watching the forest as the sun began to set and the orange sky began to burn into black. The tension in Josh's face began to ease. The worried creases on his forehead flattened out, and a thoughtless smile lifted the corners of his lips. He had forgotten. He had forgotten everything. The forest is so beautiful, isn't it? He asked me. I'm so glad we decided to take this trip together, just the two of us. I told Josh I wanted to head to bed early, and he agreed. As soon as I heard his breathing become slow and even, I crept from our tent as silently as I could. I tiptoed around our mostly abandoned campsite and tried to ignore how creepy our once lively circle of tents now felt. As I rummaged through each of my friends' belongings, looking for anything that could help Josh and I get out of here, I felt like I was traipsing through a ghost town. In the end, I found nothing. The car keys were nowhere to be found, and the food and water we had left would only last us another day or two at most. I made my way back down the mountain, constantly tripping and scuffing up my hands and knees as I tried to traverse the massive boulders in the dark. After what felt like hours, I reached the van. I pulled desperately at each of the locked handles, but none of the doors budged. I collapsed against the cool metal of the van and let myself exhale a loud, frustrated sob. I felt completely and utterly defeated. Whatever was going on within my own broken, twisted mind or out in the dense shadows of the forest was completely out of my control, and there seemed to be no escape. I was so tired and confused. I just wanted to sleep, but the fear of Josh wandering into the forest while I slept kept me from closing my weary, drooping eyelids. If he was all I had left, if the rest of my friends are truly gone, the only thing I could do was get him out of this forest alive. I steeled myself and forced my shaking hands to pick up a rock off the ground. I was readying myself to smash through one of the van's windows when a faint wail made me stutter. The sound was faint from where I now stood, but it was undeniably present in the otherwise silent forest. The screams had returned. As I scrambled my way back up the mountain, getting lost, tripping, and falling over my feet in the darkness, I realized the sound was growing louder than ever, and even more high-pitched and pitiful sounding than I remembered. I tried to follow the sound back to our campsite, but it seemed to pulsate from every direction, bleeding through every inch of the forest, making me completely unsure of where I was going. Help! It cried over and over again until the word tangled in on itself and lost all meaning. When I finally reached camp, it was just in time to see Josh's silhouette disappear into the tree line. I screamed after him, but it was too late. He was gone. I had only one choice left. I had to go in after him. I sprinted past our deserted tents and into the dense tree line. Twisted branches seemed to come at me from every direction, scratching my face and arms as I sprinted deeper and deeper into the dark forest. Josh! Josh! I called again and again until my voice turned hoarse and unrecognizable. I could feel my breath becoming more and more desperate and erratic, but I had no time to rest or slow down. I had to find Josh before it was too late, before he disappeared into the forest forever. The mountain was steeper on this side, descending into a cliff that jutted out in odd, uncontrollable angles. I hung onto the trees to keep myself upright, scanning the impenetrable darkness for any signs of movement. At one point, I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye, but when I scrambled my way over to the shape, it was just another pile of fallen bricks, more remnants of what had been lost on this mountain. My legs felt numb and uncontrollable, and I was too disoriented to catch myself as one of my ankles twisted and I fell blindly. I could feel the impact of sharp rocks and branches as my body flipped and rolled down the side of the mountain, stopping only when my leg snagged under a boulder and pulled my limp body to a halt with a jolt of excruciating pain. I felt myself cry out with uncontrollable pain and rage. I couldn't stop the pitiful sobs that racked my broken, mangled body as I lay helpless in the dark, deserted forest. I stared up at the beautiful starry sky, and I blindly felt my way down to my wound. I was met with hot, wet blood, torn fabric, and something sharp. I know now that I was feeling my protruding bone, but back then my brain refused to even consider this. I couldn't fathom it. I couldn't fathom any of it. Tears stung my eyes. I was stuck. There was no way I could make it to safety, and everyone I had brought with me onto this cursed mountain was now gone. I cried and begged for help for what felt like eternity. I screamed with pitiful, high-pitched desperation until my words tangled in on each other and lost all meaning. I don't know how long I was there, alone on the side of the mountain. It was probably only an hour, but it felt like days. My wailing became subconscious, just something that happened with every haggard breath I took. I winced every time I heard the pitiful, inhuman cries for help, but I could not seem to bring myself to stop. All I could seem to do was listen as the strange, broken creature continued to cry. I didn't hear the sound of approaching feet until it was almost on top of me. Then, finally, a figure emerged from between the trees. I thought my broken mind might be playing tricks on me until the figure came closer and I could make out a face. It was Mikey. It was so odd, I barely even recognized him at first. He looked like a complete stranger, or someone I had not set eyes on in several years. He just stood there for a moment, staring at me, and I wasn't even sure if he could see my face in the darkness. I heard screaming. He muttered, so softly I could barely hear the words. "Mikey!" I finally managed to croak out into the empty air between us. "It's me, Catherine." He looked at me so strangely, none of his usual mirth brightening his features, and for one horrible moment I was certain he was going to open his mouth and ask, "Who's Catherine?" Instead, he scooped me up in his long arms and carried me back up the mountain. We made it back to the campsite, and I was certain I was imagining things when I saw Autumn, Sylvia, and Josh emerge from their tents, bleary-eyed and confused at the sounds of Mikey's cries for help. They had crowded around us, asking a million questions. I was somewhat aware of Josh's hands on my face, Sylvia's shrill voice, but everything was muted behind the searing pain in my leg and the ringing in my ears. Everything was happening very fast. I was jostled into Josh's arms and taken back down to the van. We rode back to civilization, bringing only the bare essentials with us. My friends were shouting and crying in confusion, trying to talk to me, but I couldn't hear anything they said. In my mind, all I could hear were the screams. I'm sure you can infer what happened after that. Hospital, home, concerned parents, concerned friends, psych evaluations, a college graduation that I barely remember. I existed in a dense smog for a while, sleepwalking my way through a reality that never felt all that real to me. I'll let you make your own theories about what really happened on that mountain, because your guess is as good as mine. My friends all tell the story the exact same way. We all went to sleep after telling ghost stories around the fire. Mikey woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my screams. He found me collapsed with a broken leg and carried me back to safety. I was in shock and wasn't making much sense, but they all figured I sleepwalked into the forest, tripped, and fell. The story makes sense, a lot more sense than my version, anyway, but I've never really been able to accept it. The dissonance between our two distinct versions of what happened caused a rift. I lost touch with my friends not too long after we all graduated, and Josh and I broke up not long after that. I know what happened to me isn't their fault, but I couldn't separate them from it. After that trip, we all looked at each other a little differently. I know it's crazy, but some small part of me still wonders if it was all some stupid prank gone terribly wrong. Maybe Mikey wanted us to become a part of the mountain's lore. Maybe they were just trying to mess with me, and they took it way too far, to a point they could never be honest with me about. There's one part of that theory that doesn't fit, though. The screams. My screams. Either way, I wanted to write all this out, maybe get a few of your opinions on what you think could have caused all this. Sleepwalking? A stress-induced psychotic break? Like I said, your guess is as good as mine. The only thing I do know is that it's been 10 long years since that camping trip, and I've never been the same since. Still, my memory of that night is eroding with time, and I want to jot it down before I forget everything. 8th story. Whatever you do, don't open your eyes. All around me is the black of the void. I'm standing in the nothingness with only the sound of my heavy breathing and my rapidly beating heart. Through the darkness, I hear a familiar voice. It says, "Whatever you do, don't open your eyes. Don't even peek. Just keep them closed." I hear the peepers from inside my head. Hissing whispers say, "They're coming for you next." I woke up in my bedroom. The room was still dark. My sheets were in a tangled knot, ripped free from the corners of the bed and damp with sweat. My heart and breathing were pounding at wild intervals, like one was trying to outpace the other. Andy and I had been best friends over 20 years since kindergarten. I had been having these dreams about him every night for the last 3 weeks. Every night since the day that he disappeared. Andy is a good person. He volunteers at the soup kitchen every Thanksgiving. Talked me into going with him for the past 10 years. He would give you the shirt off his back. We're both good people. We don't deserve this. When we were younger, we'd been a handful. We were always getting into trouble. It was never anything illegal or life-threatening. Well, there was that one time in the woods. We were 12, and Andy had almost put out my eye with an arrow. Another time, we almost got arrested for trying to steal some puppies. We were drunk, and they were just wandering around in a garage, the door left open wide. That was just rambunctious youth. This is not like that. I know that I'm going to end up just like Andy did. They marked him, and now they've marked me. You don't get an official notice. Nobody has to tell you. I knew I had to heed the warning we'd been given. You have to shut your eyes. I had shouted as much to Andy. Nobody would believe me if I told them what happened, so I haven't. Not until now. I was with Andy the night he disappeared. He didn't go missing. That's what his mom keeps posting on social media in her desperate search for him. She can't make heads or tails of it. First her sister, now her son. They didn't go missing. That implies they can be found. They're gone, lost in the nothing. They disappeared into thin air. This started with Andy's aunt. Growing up, we always thought that she was a little nuts, but she and Andy were close, and Andy and I were like brothers. To us, this meant that Aunt Darlene, by proxy, was my aunt as well. I even called her that, Aunt Darlene. Aunt Darlene worked from home, making her living as a psychic, reading tarot cards, and seeing the things that haunted people. I was raised not to believe in those things. I believed anyway, but was raised not to. I especially believe now. After she disappeared, Andy said she would visit him in the night while he slept. In these dreams, the same sort I'm having now, he could tell he was in a vast place of darkness. An endless void, empty of time and space. Total blackness, so thick he couldn't even see his hands. It's like all of your senses choose to abandon you, with the exception of your hearing. He couldn't see Aunt Darlene, but he heard her whispering to him said, "No matter what, keep your eyes shut." She named them peepers. Whether that's what they're actually called or something she dubbed them, I can't be sure. Andy started acting very strangely after those dreams began. He called me several times to tell me about the dreams. Each time, he seemed to be slipping away from rationality a little bit further. The last time I saw him, he said he was seeing things. I've started seeing things as well. It starts as a shadow. You'll be walking down the sidewalk at night, and wait, did that shadow just move, or was it a trick of the light? You'll stare at the spot you thought you saw something you should not have seen. It's nothing. You'll think the dark is mischievous for someone alone. I better quicken my pace, get myself safely home. You'll move a bit more hurriedly in the gloaming dark, yet with a facade of nonchalance. Something jagged does stalk you in the soft edges of the night. As you see it flicker in and out of sight, Even with the sense of dread alerting fight or flight, you will ignore it, your instinct. You'll write the feeling off, preferring to convince yourself the more pleasant thought that there is nothing wrong. Yet there's still that small voice urging you on. Don't delay. Home is safe, but you won't be any safer there. It isn't nothing. It's definitely something, and no matter how many locks you have, you're not going to keep it at bay. They mark you when you stare. As soon as you see, it sees you too. You become a shining beacon. Then one turns to two. Then the others come, one by one. Shadows that are not supposed to move, vying for spaces out of the light and crowding just on the edge of your sight and filling your periphery like a vignette of darkness. They'll follow for a while, waiting for their moment. It may be days or weeks. It may be spurred by their growing numbers in the corner of your eyes, or maybe the victor is predetermined and this is a game. The rest are only here to witness. Only one of them can have you, and as their numbers bloat, one by one their individual chances slim. They're patient, so they wait until the moment is right. Then one night, they'll work as a team so one of them can strike. That is what happened to Andy. I watched it until I remembered to shut my eyes. When I opened them again, I had found my way back from the shadows, all alone. I stood on an empty sidewalk in the sweet after-midnight air, bathed in the lonesome glow of a single streetlight. The night I began to see them was the night that Andy disappeared. Aunt Darlene had been gone almost 4 weeks then. He called me to meet him at the bar at 10 o'clock. He'd sounded frantic on the phone. Anytime we'd meet up like this in the past, Andy had always beat me there. I was the late one. He was the 10 minutes early type. That night, he didn't show up until almost 10:30. His eyes had the wild look of a haunted man. He quietly slid into the stool next to me while I was looking the other way. I turned, and suddenly he was there, casting nervous glances to every dark corner of the room. "Are you okay, Andy?" I asked with serious concern. He did not make eye contact with me when he replied, No, Scott, I'm not." And then he whispered harshly, "I know what took Aunt Darlene. Does this have something to do with your dreams? About her telling you to close your eyes?" Andy was twitching erratically, looking everywhere and nowhere all at once. No, well, yes, but no. I saw it. Them. I see them everywhere. "What are you talking about?" I was so confused. He changed the subject. "Carol's gone. Took the baby. Want a divorce. What's going on with you, man?" I asked. "Drugs." Andy sighed heavily, but his erratic behavior didn't slow. "Coffee. Haven't been sleeping. Lost my job a couple weeks ago." Mostly she was mad about the lights. "The lights. Yeah, been keeping them all on. Haven't turned them off. If you turn them off, I turn them back on." I made a decision then. We shouldn't be at a bar. "Maybe I should walk you home," I suggested. "We can talk more there." He liked that idea, saying, "Yeah, in the lights." I don't know what I was thinking coming here. So dark. Okay, yep. I was looking at him from the corner of my eye. "We'll talk in the lights." Andy hadn't ordered anything in the few minutes that he had been there, and had been nursing the same beer for the entire time I'd sat waiting. I put $10 on the bar in front of me and left. When we were outside and on the sidewalk, he began walking very briskly, then jogging. "Hey, slow down," I cried out. He did not. I was forced to match his pace to keep up. "They're everywhere. Don't you see them?" He panted. I'd had it. "Andy, what are you talking?" Then I did. I did see them. A jagged shadow had popped its head out from inside a garbage bin, right there in front of us. It flitted in and out of vision for a second, like it was broadcasting itself on the wrong frequency, and then ducked back down. Andy changed directions, darting down an alley. That was a mistake. He should have stayed on the sidewalk, in the light. He realized it too late. Halfway down the alley, he came to a dead stop. His hand was covering his face, and they were crawling out from every dark corner on all fours, moving like stalking spiders towards him. The shadows had taken solid form and were flickering in and out of our frequency. They were surrounding him. "Scott, don't look. Don't look. Don't look, don't look, don't look. Don't. Look." In the dream, Aunt Darlene said not to look. The trouble was, how do you look away from something so mesmerizingly horrific and strange? How do you look away from the wreck when you pass? From your friend before he vanishes? 2 of them began crawling up him then, one on his back and one toward his face. He howled a scream and shuddered bodily, but made no attempt to move. I watched as the one on his back pried his hands away. I watched as the one at his face began to peel apart his eyelids. Oh God, Andy, shut your eyes. Shut your eyes. It all made sense then. I knew that what Aunt Darlene had been telling him in his dreams was true. But shutting them hadn't been enough. It wasn't enough for Andy, and it won't be enough for me either. It still got inside of him. I watched as the thing pulled his eyelids apart and climbed through, like liquid spinning down two adjacent drains and into his face. He changed frequencies then, to match theirs, like all-black static on an old television, an angular moving silhouette with sharp edges. Then he snapped off, and I watched him disappear, closing into himself like an aperture. Andy was turned off like a television set, the jagged static collapsing in on his belly button until he was gone. I watched it all happen. The other shadows, the peepers, watched too, and they began to flicker out of sight until only one remained. That one turned then, watching me. I closed my eyes and turned back to the sidewalk, using a wall to feel the way as quickly as I could. I didn't open my eyes again until the black of my eyelids began glowing red, and I was sure that I was back in the light. The last time I dreamed of Andy was days ago, because I haven't slept. He's been missing almost a month now. After several sleepless nights of sitting under lights, I think I finally figured out where they went wrong, Andy and Aunt Darlene. Even under the light of every lamp you own, you're creating places, obscure dark spaces where the peepers can hide. More light means more shadows. Light is not the solution. You're not supposed to hide in the bright. You're supposed to hide in the nothing. That's the only place they don't seem to be. I'm staring down into the kitchen sink, looking at the spoon, trying to decide, and then I do decide. I'll survive. This way they'll have no place to hide. When one is done, it stares up at me from the kitchen sink, expressionless and bloody, and yet seeming somehow to gaze upon me, still wide with shock. There's just one left. I take a shaky breath. The spoon feels cold against my eyelid, against my skin. I push it in. 9th story. I saw something in the woods of Nova Scotia, Canada. I need to know what it was. This is a story I haven't really told anyone. Geez, if it weren't for my best friend being present when it happened, I probably would have gaslit myself into believing it was a nightmare or I was just going plain nuts. It's one of those memories that, no matter how much time goes by, you never forget. The details don't get muddy for even a moment. It was 2012, my freshman year of high school. I was 15 years old and had been in the company of my best friend that night. Let's call her Marie. We lived in a fairly small town on the eastern coast of Canada, Nova Scotia to be exact. It was an old mining community sat in the middle of the woods, to paint a picture for you. There wasn't really much to do. Our economy had tanked many moons before the rest of the country, so outside of hard drugs or crime, all you really had to do was walk around. Marie and I just so happened to have made walking a bit a natural pastime. We'd properly mapped out that entire town and its surrounding hills and forests in rain, shine, sleet, or snow. We'd seen everything our little community had to offer, from its vast range of wildlife to its colorful selection of junkies. Please, keep these tidbits in mind before you tell me what we saw was an animal or a human. It was an autumn night, with nothing more for two high school girls to do, and homework not being something we specialized in. We decided to go on one of our many town walks. This night in particular had us go a little off the beaten trail. You see, typically we'd have stuck to the main roads, probably ended up at a Tim Hortons before calling it a night and heading back home, but not tonight. Tonight we decided to walk by the food bank. You might be wondering what the draw of an old food bank is. You see, it wasn't just a food bank. Back when we were still a mining town, our food bank was a train station. Trains would come by and pick up coal that was freshly dug from the coal mines and take it all across the country. The old train yard was still there. Its now rust-covered cars acting as mock tombs to a much more prosperous era gone by. We'd frequented the train yard with our friends in the past, climbing the cars, sneaking inside, among other things that could have gotten kids hurt. So it wasn't a new place to us at all, and we thought that since it was at the tree line, tucked away in a quiet enough part of town that we could freely walk and chat without the concern of traffic or the like, sidewalks weren't very frequent on that side of town. The sun had already set as we made our way down the long stretch of road. That October chill grasping at our small frames like glue, while the all-too-familiar autumn smell of still-dying plant life had permeated the air. We were talking to each other about what teenage girls typically babble about. Boys, Facebook, real important stuff. We had been so caught up in our conversation of the most dire importance that by the time we had made it to the fence that lined the train yard, it genuinely took us a moment to notice the noise. It was a very clear scream. We stopped dead in our tracks and began to stare at each other, not so much out of fear, but bewilderment. It didn't quite sound like an animal, but it definitely didn't sound human either. I gotten up close and personal with enough cougars, wolves, and toddlers to know that this screaming we were hearing was caught somewhere in between man and beast. We stood there, glaring into each other's eyes for a few more seconds before finally turning our attention towards the sound. It was dark, mind you, not pitch black as there were some streetlights around, though few and far between, but we couldn't see anything. To us from where we were standing, it was just an old train station turned food bank, a rusted-out fence, and a couple of unused and falling-apart train cars. The screams didn't subside as we were now staring into the foreground of what became a series of mental photographs of the area. It was then I realized that just up ahead, the third and final train car sat partially covered from our viewpoint by a few bushes. I had turned my head to Marie, a mischievous grin donning my face like a cowl. "Last one to the train car has to buy the French vanillas," I exclaimed before quickly jogging along the side of the fence toward the final car. I heard Marie call out, "Hey, wait up," as my feet clearly were acting before my brain. I mean, gosh, this could have been some wild animal or really anything, and I was just running in a blind. I'm not particularly a brave person, and I'm honestly not sure why I did this or anything else that happens from here on out. I rounded the fence, the screaming getting louder and louder as I strode closer and closer. My heart began to race with both anxiety and sheer excitement. I wasn't sure what I was even getting myself into or what I was expecting to see at all. Needless to say, about a second later, the ever-increasing beating from my chest had come to a standstill as my heart had made itself a new home in my throat. I stopped so quickly Marie had slammed right in the back of me, but I was so frozen in fear at what I was now looking at that I barely even budged, the screaming still echoing off of the forest so loudly I could barely hear the faint whisper of an "oh my God" escape Marie's lips. No more than about 20 feet away from us, crouched just under the train car, was a pale, hairless, and naked person. It was just sitting there under the front of the car, screaming into the darkness of the autumn night. Each time it screamed, its arms would leer forward from under the car. They extended out to an unnatural length, almost like 2 tree branches. We both stood there, frozen in a mixture of fear and confusion. What were they doing? Were they hurt? On drugs? A million questions had begun to race through my head, and one look at Marie's face had told me the same questions were racking her mind as well. We must have stood there just watching in complete awe for what felt like 5 minutes. But realistically, it couldn't have been more than a few seconds, maybe a minute at the most. That's when, in my infinite wisdom, I decided to take a few steps closer. I took my first shaky step towards it. I felt Marie's hand grasp my arm, as if to say, "Don't," but it was clear that her fear outweighed her functionality as I easily broke from her grip just by continuing forward. I had closed about 5 or so feet of distance before stopping. I continued to stare at it from my position for another moment before clearing my throat and stammering the words, "Hey, are you okay?" The second I said those words, any thought of this being a person in need of help had flown out the window and dissipated in the cool nighttime air. Almost as if someone had hit stop on a recording, the screaming it had been happy to emit had ceased, and then it was staring at us. You need to understand, it didn't seem to even move its head. It was just 1 second staring forward into the night, and the next right back toward us. A faint growl began to seep into the area now from where it was positioned as I took in the details of its face, in which I had become sure it wasn't human. It had a mouth that seemed to take up the width of most of its face, like a thin crack in a slab of concrete. Its eyes were small, but almost glowed in through the darkness with the most piercing yellow I have ever seen. After it had taken its time to mimic our staring back at us, its crack-like mouth had almost cartoonishly curled into a smiling man-like grin, its lips parting to reveal its long, jagged, and razor-like teeth. The beast and I continued locked into this war of attrition, though it was admittedly clearly more confident in being the dominant one in the exchange of looks. It broke the stare down after another moment, bringing its long, twiggy arms up from under the train car. It wrapped its fingers around the lip of the car and, at a near breakneck speed, kicked itself out from under the train car with a swing, almost like a chimpanzee leaping from one tree branch to another before landing and planting itself on the ground in a pose akin to that of a frog. It continued to its gaze, which now had begun to feel as though I was being sized up. My whole body had been shaking at what was akin to Mach 5. I tried to avert my eyes, look anywhere else, as it felt like any moment I would pass out in sheer terror, but I was drawn in. It felt almost like it had me in some sort of trance. I watched as it slowly began to stand, unfurling itself from the position it was in. It just seemed to get taller and taller until what I was looking at was at its full stance. Its entire body a pasty gray. Its arms had drooped down, well past its knees, and its legs hooked in the back near the calf, almost like a goat. The words "I'm not religious" in the slightest, though I was raised Catholic in my younger years, and the only words I could think of muster were "Hail Mary, full of grace," as I began to pray and stare down what I was sure was my end. The creature then leered itself forward, throwing its arms back as its jaw unhinged itself from its skull and dropped down to about its collarbones as it let out one final shriek, the noise embedding itself in my brain and making sure not to ever leave, to forever haunt my nightmares along with the image. I closed my eyes so tight my head began to hurt. I could feel tears streaming down my cheeks with my lips pierced close so tightly that not even a breath could escape them, and then nothing. Silence. Deafening silence. Was it over? That quickly? Was I dead? I slowly opened one eye, peeking out. I saw it. A final look. It had retaken its crouching position, giving us its final glance as well before it turned its back to us. An encounter that had felt like it lasted hours had then swiftly ended in that of a few mere seconds as the creature leapt from its position to the tree line, and then one final leap into the woods. Just like that, it had vanished. I had almost all but forgotten Marie was there until the softness of her voice had brought me back to earth with a "Kenzie, what the was?" I turned to her. Her skin had gone sheet white, and her eyes were red with tears. My legs had finally given out from the sheer exhaustion of it all as I had fallen to my knees, Marie quickly running over and catching me in an embrace as we silently wept. I'm not sure too much of what happened after that. It's all a blur, really. I told some people at first, but they were quick to laugh me off as a liar or that I was simply being over-imaginative, with Marie moving away about a year later and my only witness having gone. That didn't help my credibility. It's been 10 years since then. I no longer live in Nova Scotia and actually live in the same town as my best Marie again. We still bring this up to each other every now and again, but refrain from telling most anyone else out of fear of being labeled crazy. My last words I'd like to say are pretty blunt. If you live in Nova Scotia, Canada, please be careful. There is something living in the woods, and it is not human. 10th story. The Wolfman of Black Lake. Dylan lived a quiet life in Black Lake, Alaska. The town was named after a small lake there that had a high concentration of algae and was completely surrounded by trees that cast their shadows upon the lake unless the sun was at its zenith. These two factors caused the small lake to have a dark tint, which led to the choice of the name Black Lake. His closest neighbor was about 3 miles away, and that's how he liked it. Waking up in the morning to see the snow clinging to the thick forest of trees was his paradise. Sure, he encountered a bear here or there, or maybe the occasional wolf, but the truth was that if he left the wildlife alone, then they would do the same. Except for the deer. They come in like a swarm of bees and crap all over the place. He tried using repellent and would make loud ruckuses to scare them away, but nothing worked. That's why he got his two boys. They were two Canadian Eskimo dogs called Bruce and Port. He'd raised them from puppies, and they were loyal dogs and, honestly, Dylan's best friends. They were territorial and did a great job keeping those damn deer away. They even seemed to keep the bears and wolves away. They weren't scared easily and were as hard-headed as they were big, always ready to charge out into the trees. They were the first to clue Dylan into the fact that something was very wrong. One night, he heard a rustling coming from his trash cans outside. He whistled for Bruce and Port to chase off whatever critter was making the noise, but the dogs wouldn't listen. They both stood there at the open door, shifting anxiously and whining. For the first time in 5 years, something was scaring them. Dylan wasn't an idiot. If something was scaring Bruce and Port, he wasn't about to investigate what it could be. He shut and locked the door. He made sure he had a shotgun near him, and he didn't go to sleep. The sounds from the cans were becoming louder and louder. He only left the house when the sun was up in the sky, and the sounds had stopped hours prior. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. His metal trash cans were crushed, as if something strong had wrapped its arms around them and squeezed. Trash was everywhere, torn and ripped. At first, Dylan assumed it must have been a massive bear searching for scraps. It wasn't until he saw the paw prints that his bear theory went out the window. He had seen paw prints from wolves many times. They were easy to recognize. These prints, though, they were huge, easily 3 times the size of any print he had seen. That wasn't what scared him the most. It was apparent that whatever animal had made these had been walking on their hind legs. Dylan didn't know what it was, but also didn't want to find out. Whatever it was, hopefully it had searched for scraps, hadn't found any, and went on its way. That next night, Dylan realized that his hopes were for naught. Around 1 a.m., a great howling startled Dylan awake. The dogs jumped off the edge of the bed only to quickly hide underneath it. The sound was unlike any animal he had ever heard, hoarse and echoing. Even the crickets stopped chirping as if scared to disrupt the great noise. What was worse was that the sounds weren't far off. Suddenly his front door started to shake wildly. Dylan grabbed his gun, sure that something was about to burst through the door. Loud scratching sounds could be heard from the other side of the door. The creaking of the thick wood was loud, and it seemed that the door would give way at any second. And then, nothing. The shaking and creaking stopped just as suddenly as it had started. The howling could be heard coming from farther and farther away until it was gone. The crickets played their song again as if nothing had happened. Dylan didn't sleep that night either. He sat in his rocking chair with his shotgun in his lap. Bruce and Port slowly left their hiding spot and lied down at his feet. He didn't open that door until it was time to let them out for the day. Their fear had seemed to disappear, and they ran out into the snow. Dylan walked to the front of the door. Scratch marks. Giant, deep scratch marks. Whatever it was that had left them could have easily broken down the door. So why didn't it? Dylan walked back inside and slumped on his chair. The scary stories that his grandmother had told his brother Eddie and him as children had been racing back into his mind ever since he had seen the paw prints. He had tried being logical. After all, he was an adult. He shouldn't be scared of wives' tales made purposely to scare children into obeying. Still, logic was failing him, and his grandmother's stories were fitting too well into this equation. Never leave into the woods after dark, she would say, because the wolfman stalks through the trees looking for prey. He isn't a werewolf. There is no human in him, though some of his physical features are quite human-like. Maybe years and years ago he was a man, but no one knows for sure. What is known is that the wolfman is over 10 feet tall, with coarse fur covering his body. His face, feet, legs, and hands all resemble a wolf's, but he is not a wolf. Wolves are not evil. Wolves don't like to play with their food. Wolves are just animals trying to survive, but the wolfman is different. He likes the fear of his prey. He likes the pain he can inflict. He leaves a mark when he's found someone he likes, and then he will return to claim his kill. The best way to stay safe is to stay around other people. He will stay away from those that walk together. Dylan was a grown man. How could he even think this could be an option? Still, what explanation was there for what had been happening the last few nights? He pondered for hours until the sun was setting. Weird. Bruce and Port never stayed out all day. They should have been home hours ago, scratching at the door to be let in. He opened the front door and started calling out their names. It got dark quick out in the woods, and soon he could barely see a few feet ahead of himself. Dylan went to the back door to see if yelling out in the opposite direction would catch the dog's attention. He opened the back door and opened his mouth to holler when he let his mouth fall shut. There was a large figure laying still in the snow. Was a mystery creature crouched and ready to pounce? Dylan moved a shaking hand up and turned on the backlight. He screamed. Piled on the snow were the mangled and bloody bodies of Bruce and Port. He stood frozen in shock until movement farther out caught his eyes. There was a dark figure slowly walking closer to the light. He couldn't make out details, but he noticed a couple of things. 1. The figure was huge, easily 10 feet tall. 2. It had an odd gait that Dylan had never seen any creature have before. When he heard the loud, guttural growl, he quickly slammed the door shut. The figure barreled at the door, causing a crack in it immediately. A couple more pushes, and the door would give way. Dylan didn't even think. He grabbed his keys and ran through his house and through the front door. He made it into his truck when he heard the back door splinter open. He put the keys in the ignition and started the truck up, hitting the gas with all his might. The truck had moved about 10 feet when he heard the sound of claws scraping against the metal of the back of his truck, as if trying to grab it. He just made it. Dylan looked in his rear-view mirror for only a second as he sped away. The sight of the creature would forever be in his nightmares. The creature was pitch black and seemed to be made of pure muscles. There was blood on his muzzle where long, sharp teeth were bared into a snarl. But it was the eyes, those red, unforgiving eyes, that truly shook Dylan to the bone. He looked forward and never looked back. 10 years later, and Dylan worked as a mechanic in a suburban town. His wife and 2 kids knew that he had once lived in Black Lake, but he refused to ever talk about his life there. His youngest son was going through a phase where he was scared of monsters. Silly Brandon, his oldest Todd, said, "Monsters aren't real, right, Dad?" He said, looking up at his father. Dylan smiled and nodded. Neither noticed that the smile never reached his eyes. Thanks a lot for watching this video till the end. Drop your suggestions in the comment section.